We're going to attempt to kind of take this by each section. Your Bible probably breaks this chapter up, John chapter 11, into 5 sections. So we're going to try to read each section and then come back and talk about it. But I did want to start with just a quick introduction to the chapter first. By the way, if anybody has any questions, comments, feel free to raise your hand. I welcome those always. Love to have some conversation in classes like this. But I wanted to just mention a couple of things about the introduction. First of all, there's 7 miracles recorded in John. So John records 7 miracles for us. This one's a little bit, I call it the icing on the cake, if you will, right? So if you think about those 7 miracles that we've read about so far, Jesus changes water to wine, right? That's his power over nature. Jesus heals a government official's son in Capernaum, far away. Jeremiah did a lesson on this a couple weeks ago. He has power over distance. Jesus heals a lame man by the pool of Bethesda. Power over sickness. He feeds 5,000. Power over quantity. He walks on water. Power over physics. He heals the man who's been born blind in Jerusalem. A man was born physically, didn't have capabilities, and he gave him those capabilities. And now, what's the big one? What does he conquer with this one? Death, right? He conquers death. And so, it's interesting that this miracle, somebody tell me, what other Gospels is this miracle recorded in? Anyone? Trick question. It's not, right? It's actually not recorded in any of the other synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. So maybe just a quick question, and I've got a few questions throughout the class that I'll ask to get us talking a little bit. But what are some possible reasons why this miracle may be recorded in John? Not necessarily nowhere else, but why might John possibly have decided to put this in here? Anyone?
Love. I mean, the great love that Jesus showed for his son.
Okay. It's obviously a really big deal, right? And
The catalyst for their reason to go ahead and kill him.
that's right. I mean, I think that's that could possibly be the reason as well. And so what we're talking about there is when he performs this miracle, he's near Jerusalem. They find out about this miracle. And what's going to happen at the end of this chapter? There's going to be a plot to kill Jesus, right? So it's this really big thing that takes place, and it might be that catalyst, I think is what we were trying to point out there, that put him over the top. Why might it not have been in some of the other ones? Just curious if anybody happens to maybe have some ideas around that. I read one thing, which I'm going to make a comment on. Sorry, DJ, go ahead.
This goes honestly focusing on Jesus' deity. He is that side of him. But I was going to say that before. So
Okay, that's all right. I got the answer to the next one. Okay, so I had read it's possible that so Peter's not mentioned anywhere from John 6:28 all the way to John 13:6. And it was mentioned, the same thing happens in Matthew 19-26, Luke 18-22, Mark 10-11. So there's some that might make the guess that they had stayed in Jerusalem for the Passover. And they weren't actually with Jesus whenever this miracle was performed. And so it's possible that some of these other gospel writers may not have even been there. I don't know that, but I read that. I thought it was interesting. I thought I would share that. We already mentioned it. Melinda mentioned it. But this miracle, this miracle took place in Bethany, right? So if we jump to this slide right here, we're just going to try to show. I don't know if this is not the green one, is it? Here's the green one. Does it work? It works. All right. So Jeremiah just finished chapter 10, and if you remember at the end of chapter 10, they tried to stone Jesus, right? They were attempting to stone Jesus, and they retreated. So that's that number 1 right here. And they retreat over here to a place called Perea, which was basically beyond the Jordan. And then this miracle that's happening now, or that's going to happen, is over here in Bethany near Jerusalem. Now, Jesus is over here when this happens, but he's going to end up coming back. How far is Jerusalem from Bethany? Right? Look at this.
20 plus. 2 miles.
What did you say? 20
plus.
20 plus miles? Or you say miles? I think it's 2, actually. Okay. Yeah, I actually read that it was 2 or just right around 2 miles. So So very, very close to Jerusalem. So obviously when this miracle would have happened, word would have traveled very fast, right? The word to Jerusalem would have traveled very fast. We'll talk about that later when we see kind of the reaction from some of the Jews from Jerusalem, how quickly they get there when Lazarus is raised from the dead. And then we can come back to what happens next. Yeah, so let's actually go ahead and just jump into the first section here. So I'm going to take a volunteer, or somebody can just start reading. But I want to read chapter 11, verse 1 through 16.
Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom ye love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. So when he had heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days at the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought he was speaking about taking a rest in sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go that we may die with him.
Thank you. So there's a lot that we could probably spend 40 minutes talking about each of these sections. So I'm going to call out some certain things throughout each of these sections, but feel free to add anything that I might miss. But where does it say Mary and Martha are from? Where are they from? Bethany, right? So we just talked about that. It was right there next to Jerusalem, very nearby, not to be confused with this Bethany that's over beyond the Jordan, but it's a Bethany that is near Jerusalem. Who is Lazarus? Let me ask a different question. Is this the same Lazarus that we read about in Luke 16? No. It's not, right? Right. Interesting thing that I read. Apparently, Lazarus, Mary, Martha were very common names during this time. And there was actually I can't remember what they called it, but they had actually found a gravestone, basically, in the town of Bethany that had all 3 of these names on it. I don't know that it's that person. I don't know that it's these 3 individuals necessarily. But if it wasn't, it's because the name was common. You can't make that assumption that was their grave because this name was so common. Lazarus was so common, Mary was so common, Martha was so common. Interesting. Lazarus is not a common name for us today, so when we hear Lazarus, if you're reading the Bible for the first time and you read this, that's probably the first thing you wonder, hey, is this the same Lazarus that was in Luke 16? But it's not. All right, so the town of Mary and Martha, we talked about that. That's where they're from. How is Mary, Martha, and Lazarus related? Sorry?
Brother and sister.
Siblings, right? They're siblings. And did they have a relationship with Jesus? How do we know that? Yeah, I think there's a lot of things in this chapter that says that. If you go to verse 3, therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, him who you love is sick. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sisters and Lazarus. Verse 11, these things he said, and after he said them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go to wake him up. Over in verse 35, shortest verse in the Bible, right? But probably one of the most powerful verses in the Bible. Jesus' reaction whenever he sees Lazarus. Jesus wept. And then verse 36, some of the people that were there watching, when they saw him see Lazarus for the first time, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept him, this man from dying? And they said that because of verse 35, see how he loved him. So there appears to be a very strong relationship here with Jesus and this family. I don't know if anybody has anything additional there that I...
In Luke 10, he goes to their house, and that's when Martha's, distracted with much serving, and when you know all that story, choose the good part. Lazarus isn't mentioned, but there was a ongoing relationship through the ministry where they evidently showed him hospitality and very possibly gave him money for the ministry and everything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's some things about how the tomb that Lazarus lived in, the oil that Mary ends up anointing Christ with later on. The fact that the Jews had the reaction that they had, and so many people showed up when Lazarus died. I think they were a wealthy family. I think we can kind of assume that they were probably a fairly wealthy family as well. So Martha sends to Jesus. Martha sent to Jesus, which I think is a powerful statement in and of itself. Right? They say, go tell Jesus that our friend is sick. Why would they be interested to do that? They've seen what he can do, right? But also, they probably, because of how close they were to Jesus, they're probably well aware of the fact that he just got ran out of town, right? And so think about how difficult and the stress that was probably on them with Lazarus being as sick as he was, to make that decision. I'm going to send for Jesus and ask him to come back here and heal Lazarus, basically, and going to put him in danger, really, asking him to come back, I think. But something maybe to keep in mind. Jesus got word, and what does Jesus say? This sickness is not unto death, right? The sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus, sorry, lost my track here. Okay, so when Jesus found out, right, that Lazarus was sick, we just talked about how much Jesus loved him. Jesus didn't immediately go back to Bethany. What did he do? Waited 2 days, right? So why? Why did Jesus wait 2 days before he went back? Why wasn't he like, I got to get back there and save Lazarus right away? Or even just, we just got through talking about Jesus had the ability to heal sickness without being physically there, right? So Jesus could have healed Lazarus before he ever died, even in the distance that he was. Why didn't Jesus do that?
So God can be glorified.
That's right.
Just
That's
like
right.
the blind man.
I think it shows the way God loves us, beyond what we initially think, because he sees more than we do. And I think it explains suffering for us, too, in a great part. Why does God allow suffering? Well, he loves us.
Right.
And it pains him to see us go through that. But Jesus realized that, their faith would be moved so much further and it would have so much more significance if Lazarus played a part in this by dying.
Yeah, and I think also you got to put yourself. It's hard to say put yourself in Jesus' shoes, but you got to put yourself in Jesus' shoes. This had to be hard, right? It's showing the love that he had. We see the reaction that he has when he sees Mary cry and when Lazarus is dead. This had to be hard, and I think it shows submission to God as well. That he's got this divine plan that's in place that is probably stronger than what his heart wants to just go immediately do. Steve, you had your hand up.
I think on the hesitancy, why didn't he immediately go and heal him? To me, it's like he was going to make for sure everyone knew he was dead.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. It wasn't like, well, maybe he resuscitated him or, 4 days is a very long time. To the point where she even says,
Yeah.
he's going to be smelling by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was zero, thought that he was possibly still alive. So,
Yeah, I think there's a few things. John 11:15. I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Where's my spot here? Sorry, I lost my spot. There he is. Verse 42 in this chapter says, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe. There are multiple, there's 2 or 3 other ones as well, but there's several places that talk about they did this so that others may see. DJ?
I also like this chapter because it shows Jesus as God and man too, because he is eternal, but he's crying at the physical death of a friend, and he's having both of these things. It is hard. He's not just overlooking the human experience because he is Jesus and God. He's
Right.
also living in it, and even though he can do these things, he's still sad at
Right.
this, and I think it's.
Yeah, it's really, you start to think about how he can be our mediator and sympathize with us. Those kinds of things start to resonate, him going through things like this. We're going to keep moving here. I had another question, and I'll just talk about it here real quick. But basically, the disciples say what when he says we're going to go? He eventually says, hey, let's go heal Lazarus, right? Let's go back, and my friend is, and they basically said, hey, why? He's sleeping, he's going to wake up, and he says, nope, he's dead. Lazarus is dead. And the disciples, what was the reaction? Were they ready to go?
Trying to kill you there.
They tried to kill you there, right? Right? They tried to kill you there, and what did Jesus say? He said, it's not my time, right? Ultimately, he had this idea there's 12 hours in a day, and if there's light, you can work, and if there's darkness, you can't work. And I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's alluding to the fact that it wasn't his time. His time to work was still there, and it wasn't time for him to die yet. Jeremiah?
I think there's a deeper significance to it as well, because when he mentioned similar language in John 9, his point was, I've got to take advantage of this opportunity with this blind man to show the glory of God. I've got to take advantage of this death to show the glory of God. If I stay here because I'm afraid of the Jews, I'm going to be in darkness because I'm not doing my Father's will. And so he has confidence that it's not his time till it's his time, so I'm not too worried about that. But at the same time, our fear can't keep us from doing God's will. If we walk in darkness, we'll stumble, we'll sin, because we're not walking in the light of his word.
And then there's one at the end that says he doesn't want to go. All right, he basically says, fine, I'll go. Let's go die with you. And it's Thomas, right? Scott asked me last night for a cheat sheet on what the questions were going to be, and I said, one of the questions should be, why would you name your kid Thomas? But, Scott?
Well, even through Christ's death, he's still under control, because it was time when it was his death, and we see that in other times when there's people crowd all around him wanting to kill him, and he just slides out from amongst them. That's not going to happen unless you want it to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's in control this whole time, controlling everything, even in his own death.
There's an ultimate plan here.
Yes.
Right, that we're working towards. Let's keep moving. If I could have somebody read verse 17 through 27.
Randy, just real quick,
See.
on Thomas,
Sorry.
that part just really gets me. He gets a bad rap of being doubting Thomas.
Yeah.
And here he says, let us go with him that we may die with him.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of things we could really dive into in this chapter, but that stood out to me as well. Stephen, the fact that he doubted that Christ would be resurrected, and then he had a reputation, right? Obviously, he doubted a lot of things and was kind of the naysayer of the group. Which again, my question to Scott: why would you name your kid Thomas? No, I know why Thomas is named Thomas. It's because his wonderful grandpa. All right, somebody read 17 through 27 for me.
So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort him concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary was sitting in the house, and Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world.
All right, and so Jesus comes, not all the way to the house, but Jesus comes and Martha runs out to meet him. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Right? It's said that it's likely that Lazarus died when Jesus was told about Lazarus' death, because it's a 2-day journey from Perea to this place in Bethany. And so if you think about if he was told that he was going to die, then he waited 2 days, then he had the 2-day journey, and now Lazarus is 4 days dead. Then you can deduce that about the time that Jesus was told that Lazarus was ill was about the time that Lazarus had died, which I thought was interesting as well. 4 days also, I don't know if this is probably an interesting fact more than anything, but there's a Jewish tradition that says that on the 4th day, that basically the soul hangs out by the body for 3 days. And then on the 4th day, hoping to be reunited with the body. And then on the 4th day, it departs, right? Because the body starts to burst and it realizes it can't. I don't know if this tradition, there was some confusion about whether it was actually before this time. But it's also possible that this miracle may have caused that tradition, because if you think about Christ raising them on the 4th day, you could also see where the Jews might have said, well, once they're dead 4 days, we know they're dead, but Christ has raised somebody from the dead after 4 days. So I don't know how much truth there is into, obviously the soul doesn't do that for 3 days, but the point there is that if that was a tradition prior to this time, this 4th day would have been even of a more miraculous miracle that Jesus performed by raising him on the 4th day. And it very likely might have been why he waited 2 days, to get I don't know that, but it's a conjecture. And so Martha runs to meet him, and what does Martha say?
If you'd been here, he would not die.
If he'd just been here, he wouldn't have died, right? And Jesus tells her, your brother will rise again. How does she interpret that? Say it again? In the resurrection, right? And so Jesus takes that as an opportunity to teach. Although Jesus was about to literally raise Lazarus from the dead, what lesson was he trying to teach when he said in verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life, and then a lot of things along with that? A little bit of theology here. Sorry?
The spiritual.
The spiritual.
He's
That's
not
right.
talking about his body dying, but that he will be raised in the last day.
That's right. That's right. It's if we're dead, then we don't have to worry because we're going to live again. And if we're living and we're in Christ, we don't have to worry about death because it's not scary to us because we have somewhere to go. I'm thinking about Philippians 1:21. Paul writes, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. 2 Corinthians 5:1, for we know that if the earthly house of our tabernacle be dissolved, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So he takes this opportunity to teach a spiritual lesson about this death. Even though he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead, he's teaching as well. This death doesn't mean anything here on earth. If we're Christians, we have the ultimate cheat code, right, for death. We don't have to worry about it. And then Martha says, I believe you are in the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. I think this is a wonderful lesson for us. Think about, it's so easy to read these stories and not think about this. Like if this was happening right here, right now in front of us, that would probably hit a lot harder than reading it. And you think about the dire straits that Martha was in, but does she lose faith? Right? DJ? Yeah.
I also think when she said if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I don't think she's even blaming him as some people might think. I think she's recognizing his power.
Sure. Sure. Like I wish you had been here. Right. That's right. But I think the fact that Martha stands strong here and that she loses. I mean, so many times we hear stories about people going through struggles in life and they lose their faith in God. They lose their faith. They fall away. Right. And I think this is a great example. What Martha says here at the end. She's going through a lot. And she still has faith that Jesus Christ is who he says he is. Let's move on to the next section here. Somebody read 28 through 37.
And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, the teacher is come and is calling for you. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house accompanying her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She is going to the tomb to weep there." Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?"
So Mary did not go out with Martha. I personally just don't think she knew. I don't think she got word. Maybe more reasons to that. As you see her reaction here when she does find out, she immediately goes out there. So Mary didn't go with Martha. Martha went and had met Jesus, and now she goes and grabs Mary and brings Mary back with her. It says that she brings Mary. It says that she brings Mary quietly or secretly with her. Why might that say that? Why might that say secretly? It might say quietly in some versions.
Let that big crowd go at the same time.
It probably doesn't want to bring attention to the fact that Jesus is back in the area, right? That's a good deduction, I think. Why she might have tried to do that quietly. Some questions about why didn't Jesus come to the house. I mean, there's some discussion about, maybe he didn't want to draw attention to the Jews. There's also some discussion about a lot of times cemeteries were outside of the cities. And so the cemetery very likely was outside of the city of Bethany. And Jesus, knowing that he was going there to raise Lazarus, may have stopped in that area. And I think there's a little bit of credence to that too, because when Mary went and they saw Mary go, what did they say that Mary was probably going to do? To mourn him, right? So she could have very likely been heading in the direction of his tomb, and that was the assumption that the Jews said, well, hey, she's headed to the cemetery, to go mourn her brother Lazarus. So when she met Jesus there, all of these Jews followed her, right? I think I've got one here. Why might the Jews who were with Mary and Martha think that, sorry, I just gave you the answer to that one. Apologize for that. When Mary met Jesus, she kind of said the same thing that Martha said. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But how was her reaction a little bit different than Martha's, at least as we have it recorded?
She fell at his feet.
She fell at his feet, right?
She was in pretty hard grief.
That's right.
You could see it because it was, and I think DJ or somebody said something about this, but this passage, along with others, shows the humanity of Christ.
Right.
Because he saw someone that he cared about that was, and he had the power, obviously, he's going to show the power, but seeing anybody that you love in that much pain is going to cause you to have some type of feeling, whether you care about them or not, and it obviously meant a lot to him. He knew that he was there to heal, to bring Lazarus up. You would think that he could just brush this off, it's okay, kind of pat her on the head, but seeing how much pain she was in, it caused him to be very, troubled and cry.
Yeah. I think I'm not going to ask this question, but I'll move here to just talk about this a bit. But I mean, Avery said, Dad, I can't believe you're the one that's going to teach the one where Jesus is crying, because I'm pretty tenderhearted. But at least Ronnie's not teaching it, right? But I think Tyler and DJ make a very valid point, is that, I don't know that there's a stronger chapter in the Bible that that shows us Christ's humanity. And as many times as we've read that, we know it as the shortest verse in the Bible, that Jesus wept, right? Have we really kind of focused on that? Have we really paid attention to what that must have been through? He loved these people. He knew that he was about to raise him from the dead, right? So he wasn't worried about the long term. What he was sad about was seeing all the people around and the pain that they were going through and the suffering that they were going through. So when you think about, Hebrews 4:14 and 15, when it talks about, somebody just turn there real quick, because I'm not there. So whoever gets there first, read it. Hebrews 4:14 and 15, something we're all familiar with. obviously talking about sin specifically in that last part there, but the fact that he can sympathize and knows what we go through, even whenever we're going through really hard things and we're weak and we may sin, Christ gets it. He understands that. He understands what we're going through because he went through a lot of these things. Any other comments there? I'm sure there'll be some comments there. Scott?
Well, and they weren't bitter about his death. You know, we live a righteous life, and we've seen people that when their daughters die or a relative dies or a friend dies, they can get bitter at God.
Yeah.
You know, why us? Why him?
Right. And I think that goes back to Martha at the end there saying what she said. The Jews had a reaction here too, right? The Jews saw how much Christ loved him, and the Jews' reaction was, well, why didn't he save him? Right? If he could heal the blind man, then why didn't he save this guy? Let's go save Lazarus. Somebody read 38 through whatever that next section is, 44.
Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "By this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go."
So it starts off, Jesus again groaning in himself. He didn't get over it quickly. We just talked about how sad Jesus was. This was not something he quickly got over. They went to the tomb, they opened the tomb, and it says Christ was still groaning. Christ was still struggling with this scene that he was seeing. I think that's a great indication of just how emotional that may have been, and how a lot of times we're scared of our emotions. You know, somebody said one time, "Grown men don't cry." Well, Jesus cried, right? I mean, Jesus cried. Jimmy?
Randy, this word, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the Greek word for it, this word groan, it indicates indignation, anger. Why would he be angry? Because he was there when sin was introduced into the world. He knows that sin brought about death. And he knows that everybody is suffering, that they're sad because sin has introduced death into the world, and they have to suffer the consequences of death.
Yeah.
And that would bring on, just like you do when you're raising your kids, and you see them going through something, you know they're going to get through, but you know it saddens them, and it makes you sad too. He sees it, that sin has brought about this kind of sadness. He was there when it was introduced, and that would make him angry at sin.
Now, I appreciate you bringing that. I had a whole thing on groaning, and I skipped it to save time. But you summed it up really well in a minute. But no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's anger there involved, even maybe some verbal cues that happen right around that. But 100%. Thank you, Jimmy, for mentioning that. Yeah.
To go back to what you talked about a while ago, the example of Mary and Martha, going to the Lord, dropping it down to his feet and worshiping him, and leaning on him. Basically, just to what Jim just said, when people have a loss, instead of being mad at sin, they get mad at the Lord.
Yeah.
When it should be just the exact opposite, mad at sin and leaning on the Lord and going to the Lord for help.
Yeah, and we see that. I still think Martha, just the way that when she said in verse 27, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." I mean, that is a prime example of somebody just in utter despair, still not losing their faith. Yeah. So Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha was upset, maybe a little bit about this. Why? Because it might stink, right? I'm actually curious if he did stink. I don't think, or if it just stunk when they opened it. We don't know that. You know, he probably didn't stink as he was healed, or maybe Christ took care of that. But there's a curiosity in me. It's like, when they rolled the stone away, did it stink, right? But you know, there's a dignity thing there, right? Because they had, and think about this too. They've already buried Lazarus. They've already gone through this. They've already put him away. And now here we're going to roll the stone away. It's going to bring the stench. It's going to bring all this back. It's going to make us sad. He's going to lose his dignity. There's a good reason why she might have had this reaction. It is interesting that she had so much faith early on, or she seems to have so much faith early on. To DJ's point, you know, she thought that he could save him. But I don't think she even had any idea of what was about to happen. Right? Because early she had showed her faith, right? They took away the stone, and Jesus did what? He said, Lazarus, come forth. No. What did he do first? He prayed. What's the significance of him praying to God versus just bringing Lazarus from the dead? I'm going to go to Posey first because you already talked.
I'm just going to say it shows where the power came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to you, DJ. Sorry. She's still from me. She's also my mother-in-law, so I kind of had to. Yeah. So you know, it shows that I mean, we just got through talking about in chapter 11. You know, if you see me do the will of my Father, right? How can you not believe that I'm Christ? And here he's showing I'm in communication with our Father. I'm doing the will of our Father. He's making that connection between him and God. And it says he shouted or said, Lazarus, come forth. Maybe he did that because of all the Jews that were sitting around, right? Because keep in mind, they didn't have microphones, right? So when he goes and does his prayer in front of the Jews, he says, Lazarus, come forth. He's giving glory to God to make this happen. We're not going to read this last section here because we don't have time. I think we have 4 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. But this last section, the plot to kill Jesus, just for me to summarize it real quick, a lot of these Jews that were there had 2 reactions, right? There were 2 different reactions that happened with this miracle. One reaction was what? The good reaction. Many believed, right? Many believed, right, that Christ was the Son of God, right? What was the other reaction?
You're going to go tell the Pharisees.
I'm going to go tell the Pharisees, right? I'm going to go tell on you, right? So it's a very great example of we talk to people all the time and we seem to show them truth. It's right in front of them, and some people take it and some people do not, right? Here is a miracle of Christ raising someone from the dead that everybody knew was dead, and some people said no to it. So we shouldn't get our feelings hurt when we try to teach the truth and people walk away from it. Here's somebody that was raised from the dead, and somebody said, I'm not going to really pay much attention to that. They're going to take away my priority here in the Roman Empire. I'm going to go tell the Pharisees because I don't want to lose my stature here. I don't want to lose my place in society. Right? There are internal motives sometimes that drive people to do things that make them avoid truth. And I think that's a great, extreme example that we can look to and not be discouraged about the way that we teach. Jeremiah?
I think their unbelief is magnified even in the fact that the worry was that the Romans will hear of this rebellion and come away and take our place in the nation. So it's almost like, a retelling of history from when, Assyria is coming on Israel and they trust in Assyria to make an alliance with them to save their skin instead of trusting in God to not allow Syria to defeat them. They trust more in the enemy nation to just let them stay than in God to, if he is the Christ, to destroy Rome, if that's really what they believe the Christ would do.
Yeah. So there's, I would love to talk more, but I'm going to ask one more thing here. When Caiaphas said what he said, right? So when Caiaphas comes in here and he says, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that expedient for us that one man should die for the people and not that the whole nation should perish. What did he think he was saying, and what was he actually saying? Right? I mean, how ironic, how much foreshadowing is in there in that, right? He thought he was saying, we're going to go kill this man so we save our nation. He wasn't wrong in what he said. Christ was going to die for a nation, and he was going to bring people together, and he was going to die for the whole world, right? I thought that was really, really cool that took place. And then, at the end of the day, what ends up happening, there is this plot to kill Jesus. The Passover is coming. If I jump, I think I threw it in the end here. Yeah. So 3 there, Jesus retreats up to, I think it's Ephraim, maybe Ephraim, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But Jesus retreats out of Jerusalem with this plot to kill Jesus. The Passover's coming, though. And there are lots of Jews that are coming back into Jerusalem to prepare for the Passover, to cleanse themselves so that they can participate in the Passover. And what are they all asking themselves? Is Jesus going to show up? Right? And I think that sets us up for chapter 12. So there we go. We got through it. Thank you for your comments and thank you for your time.